Marcus Thompson was not your average traveler. He was a man who had built an empire from the ground up, brick by brick, with nothing but his determination and vision. As the founder and CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech startups in the world, Marcus had earned every ounce of respect that came his way. His company wasn't just another business, it was a movement, a beacon of innovation that had transformed industries and improved lives. And while Marcus could easily afford private jets for his travels, he preferred flying commercial, at least in first class. For him, it was about staying grounded, remembering where he came from and appreciating the little things life offered. On this particular day, Marcus found himself at John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York, ready to board Flight 721, bound for London. It was a trip he had taken many times before. Business meetings, networking events, and keynote speeches awaited him across the pond. But unlike most days, something felt different. Maybe it was the crisp autumn air outside or the buzz of excitement among passengers eager to reach their destinations. Whatever it was, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this flight would be memorable, but not for the reasons he expected. As he approached the gate, Marcus noticed how effortlessly he blended into the crowd. Dressed in a sleek navy blue suit paired with a crimson tie, he exuded confidence without being overbearing. People around him glanced occasionally, perhaps recognizing him from news articles or interviews, but Marcus didn't pay much attention. To him, fame was never the goal, making a difference was. With his carry-on bag slung over his shoulder, he handed his boarding pass to the attendant and stepped onto the jet bridge. The moment Marcus entered the aircraft, the familiar scent of polished leather and fresh linen greeted him. First class was everything you'd imagine. Spacious seats upholstered in soft fabric, mood lighting that created an ambiance of luxury, and attentive staff ready to cater to every need. Marcus made his way to seat 1A, right next to the window, the perfect spot for someone who enjoyed watching clouds drift by during long flights. As he settled in, the flight attendants greeted him warmly, offering refreshments and ensuring he was comfortable. Everything seemed normal, even pleasant. Little did Marcus know, the calm was merely the eye of the storm. While waiting for takeoff, Marcus took out his laptop, intending to review some documents for his upcoming presentation. The hum of conversation filled the cabin as other first-class passengers chatted animatedly about their plans. A middle-aged couple discussed their vacation itinerary, while a businessman seated nearby talked on the phone about stock prices. Marcus couldn't help but smile at the diversity of stories unfolding around him. Each person carried their own dreams, challenges, and aspirations. It reminded him of why he loved traveling, not just for the destinations, but for the connections, however fleeting, that he made along the way. As the plane taxied down the runway, Marcus leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes for a brief moment. He thought about how far he'd come since his early days as a struggling entrepreneur. Back then, flights like these were unimaginable. He remembered sitting in cramped economy seats, clutching a backpack filled with prototypes and pitches, hoping against hope that someone would believe in his vision. Now, here he was, flying first class, representing a company worth billions. Success hadn't changed Marcus. It had only deepened his gratitude for the journey. When the captain's voice crackled through the intercom, announcing their ascent, Marcus opened his eyes and glanced out the window. The cityscape below, slowly, shrank until it became a patchwork of lights and shadows. Up here, thousands of feet above the ground, the world felt smaller somehow. Boundaries blurred, and differences faded. Or so Marcus believed. What he didn't realize was that sometimes, no matter how high you flew, certain barriers remained firmly in place. And soon enough, Marcus would find himself face to face with one such barrier, one that would test his patience, resilience, and faith in humanity. For now, though, all seemed well. The flight attendants moved gracefully through the cabin, handing out warm towels and offering drinks. Marcus accepted a glass of sparkling water, thanking the attendant with a polite nod. He adjusted his seatbelt, checked his watch, and prepared himself for the hours ahead. If anyone had told him what was about to unfold, Marcus might have laughed it off. After all, how could a routine flight turn into anything more than just another entry in his travel log? But life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it, and Marcus was about to learn that lesson firsthand. As the flight cruised smoothly at 35,000 feet, the first-class cabin buzzed with quiet activity. Passengers were either engrossed in their books, tapping away on laptops, or gazing out the windows at the endless expanse of clouds. Marcus had just finished reviewing a document on his laptop when the soft chime of the intercom signaled the start of dinner service. The lights dimmed slightly, creating an intimate atmosphere as the flight attendants began rolling out carts, laden with gourmet meals. The aroma of freshly cooked food wafted through the air, making mouths water and stomachs growl in anticipation. Plates of grilled salmon topped with lemon butter sauce, filet mignon accompanied by roasted vegetables, and vegetarian pasta dishes were carefully placed in front of passengers. Glasses clinked softly as wine was poured, and polite chatter filled the cabin. It was clear that this wasn't just another meal. It was an experience designed to make travelers feel valued and cared for. Marcus sat back in his seat, expecting his turn to come soon. He glanced around, observing how the crew moved efficiently, from one passenger to the next, ensuring everyone received their orders promptly. Yet minutes ticked by, and no one approached him. At first, he assumed it was simply a matter of timing. Perhaps they were serving others first, or maybe there had been a mix-up with his order. After all, mistakes happened, even in first class. So, he waited patiently, scrolling through emails on his phone to pass the time. 10 minutes went by, then 15. Still, no meal arrived. By now, nearly every other passenger in the first-class section had been served. Even the couple seated 2 rows behind him, who had boarded after Marcus, were already enjoying their entrees. A flicker of unease crept into his mind. Something didn't feel right. Determined not to jump to conclusions, Marcus decided to give the crew the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they were dealing with a logistical hiccup, a missing dish, or a delay in preparation. Whatever it was, he resolved to address it calmly and professionally. Leaning forward slightly, Marcus caught the eye of a passing flight attendant. She was young, perhaps in her mid-20s, with neatly styled hair and a warm smile painted across her face. "Excuse me," Marcus said politely, gesturing toward the empty space in front of him. "I haven't received my meal yet. Could you check on that for me?" The flight attendant paused, her expression shifting ever so subtly. For a brief moment she seemed startled, almost as if she hadn't noticed Marcus sitting there. Then, without meeting his gaze directly, she replied, "Oh, your meal must have been overlooked. Let me see what I can do." Her tone was casual, dismissive even, but Marcus chose to ignore it. He nodded graciously and leaned back again, assuming the issue would be resolved quickly. But instead of returning with his food, the flight attendant disappeared behind the curtain separating first class from the galley. Minutes passed and still nothing happened. Meanwhile, the couple seated across the aisle struck up a conversation with another attendant, laughing and joking as they complimented the quality of the meal. Frustration began to simmer beneath Marcus's calm exterior. He glanced at his watch, noting that nearly half an hour had elapsed since dinner service began. Deciding to take matters into his own hands, he flagged down a different flight attendant, a man in his 40s with a more authoritative presence. "Hi," Marcus said, keeping his voice steady. "I've been waiting for my meal for quite some time now. Could you please look into it?" The man hesitated, glancing briefly at Marcus before responding. "Let me check with the team," he muttered, avoiding direct eye contact. There was something about his demeanor, his reluctance to engage, that set off alarm bells in Marcus's mind. Was this really just a simple oversight? Or was there something more going on? Determined to get answers, Marcus watched closely as the second flight attendant conferred with the rest of the crew. From his vantage point, he could see them whispering among themselves, their body language tense and guarded. Occasionally, someone would glance in his direction only to quickly look away. It was as though they were deliberately avoiding acknowledging him. Each glance, each whispered word, fueled Marcus's growing suspicion that this wasn't merely a case of negligence. Finally, the male flight attendant returned, holding a plate of food. Without a word of apology, he placed it on Marcus's tray table and walked away. The gesture felt mechanical, devoid of warmth or sincerity. Marcus stared at the dish in front of him, a plain chicken breast with steamed broccoli, and couldn't help but compare it to the elaborate meals being served to other passengers. While his neighbors enjoyed premium cuts of steak and artfully plated seafood, his offering looked like an afterthought, hastily assembled and lacking care. At this point, Marcus knew something was deeply wrong. This wasn't about forgetting a single meal, it was about being treated differently. And though he tried to remain composed, the weight of the situation pressed heavily on his chest. He thought back to similar instances in his life, times when he'd been underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed because of the color of his skin. Those memories stung, but they also reminded him of his resilience. He refused to let anyone diminish his worth, not today, not ever. Taking a deep breath, Marcus made a decision. If the crew wasn't going to offer an explanation, he would demand one. Rising from his seat, he approached the head flight attendant, a woman in her 50s with an air of authority. Her name tag read Susan, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to handling difficult situations. When Marcus introduced himself and explained the issue, Susan listened intently, nodding occasionally but never fully meeting his eyes. "I'm very sorry for the inconvenience, Mr. Thompson," Susan said, forcing a tight smile. "We'll make sure this doesn't happen again." Her words sounded rehearsed, as if she were reciting a script rather than addressing a genuine concern. Marcus pressed further, asking why it had taken so long for his meal to arrive and why it appeared so vastly different from what other passengers were served. Susan faltered, stumbling over her responses. "Sometimes these things happen," she offered weakly. "It's just an oversight." But Marcus wasn't convinced. An oversight? Really? He glanced around the cabin once more, taking note of how effortlessly the crew interacted with other passengers, how attentive and friendly they were. Yet here he was, standing in front of Susan, feeling like an outsider in a space where he belonged just as much as anyone else. The disparity was glaring, undeniable, and Marcus knew that silence wouldn't solve anything. It was time to speak up, not just for himself but for everyone who might find themselves in a similar position someday. With quiet determination, Marcus returned to his seat, his mind racing with possibilities. What would he do next? How could he ensure that this incident wouldn't fade into obscurity, brushed aside as a minor inconvenience? As the plane continued its journey across the Atlantic, Marcus realized that this flight was about to become far more significant than he could have imagined. Marcus sat back in his seat, the lukewarm plate of food untouched in front of him. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions, anger, frustration, and disbelief. But above all, there was clarity. This wasn't just about a missed meal or subpar service. It was about being treated as less than human, as someone unworthy of respect simply because of the color of his skin. He had faced discrimination before, but this felt different. It wasn't happening in some anonymous corner of society. It was occurring in one of the most exclusive spaces on an international flight, a place where privilege and professionalism were supposed to reign supreme. Determined not to let the matter slide, Marcus decided that he needed answers and accountability. He knew that speaking up could be uncomfortable, even risky, but silence would only perpetuate the problem. So, with a deep breath, he rose from his seat once more and approached Susan, the head flight attendant. Her demeanor shifted slightly when she saw him approaching, her lips tightening into what might have been an attempt at a reassuring smile. But Marcus wasn't fooled. He could see the tension in her posture, the way her eyes darted around the cabin as if searching for an escape route. "Susan," Marcus began, his voice calm but firm, "I appreciate your earlier apology, but I need more than words. This isn't just about my meal. It's about how I've been treated throughout this entire process. Can you explain why it took so long for me to receive anything, and why my meal looks completely different from what others are being served?" Susan hesitated, clearly caught off guard by the directness of his question. She glanced over her shoulder, perhaps hoping another crew member would step in to defuse the situation. When no one did, she cleared her throat and replied, "Mr. Thompson, I assure you we strive to provide excellent service to all our passengers. If there was any lapse, it was unintentional." Marcus studied her face carefully, searching for sincerity. What he found instead was evasion, a refusal to meet his gaze, a stiffness in her tone that betrayed discomfort. He realized then that she wasn't going to offer any real explanation. This wasn't about mistakes or oversights. It was about prejudice masked as professionalism. And Marcus knew that confronting this kind of bias required more than polite conversation. It required action. "I understand that things can go wrong," Marcus continued, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "But I also know when something feels intentional. You've seen how I've been treated tonight, and I want to make sure this doesn't happen again, not to me and certainly not to anyone else. I'd like to speak with the captain." The request hung in the air like a challenge. Susan blinked, rapidly, clearly unprepared for such a demand. For a moment she seemed frozen, unsure of how to respond. Then, regaining her composure, she nodded stiffly. "Let me see if the captain is available," she said, her tone clipped. Turning on her heel, she disappeared behind the curtain leading to the cockpit. As Marcus returned to his seat, he couldn't help but notice the hushed whispers spreading through the cabin. Passengers who had been oblivious to the tension moments, Ego now watched curiously, their attention drawn to the unfolding drama. Some exchanged knowing glances while others pretended not to notice. Marcus ignored them all, focusing instead on formulating his next steps. He pulled out his phone, its screen glowing softly in the dim lighting of the cabin. With practiced ease, he opened the camera app and discreetly began recording. When Susan returned with the captain in tow, Marcus greeted them both with a composed nod. The captain, a tall man with graying hair and a neatly pressed uniform, introduced himself as Captain Reynolds. His handshake was firm, but his expression was guarded, betraying a mix of authority and unease. "Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice carrying the weight of command, "I understand you've had an issue with our service tonight. I apologize for any inconvenience caused. Could you please tell me more about what happened?" Marcus recounted the events calmly, leaving out no detail. He described the delay in receiving his meal, the dismissive attitude of the crew, and the stark difference between his dish and those served to other passengers. Throughout his explanation, he kept his tone measured, avoiding accusations or emotional outbursts. Instead, he let the facts speak for themselves, allowing the absurdity of the situation to shine through. As he spoke, he subtly held up his phone, ensuring that the recording captured every word. Captain Reynolds listened intently, his brow furrowing deeper with each passing moment. When Marcus finished, the captain exhaled sharply, rubbing the bridge of his nose as if trying to ward off a headache. "This is unacceptable," he admitted, his voice tinged with frustration. "I'll speak with the crew immediately and ensure that proper protocols are followed moving forward. Again, Mr. Thompson, I apologize for this experience." While the apology sounded sincere, Marcus wasn't satisfied. Apologies were easy. Actions were what mattered. "Thank you for addressing this, Captain," he said, maintaining eye contact. "But I believe incidents like these require more than just verbal assurances. They highlight deeper issues within the system, issues that need to be addressed proactively. I hope this serves as an opportunity for your team to reflect on their practices and make meaningful changes." The captain nodded solemnly, promising to conduct a thorough review once the flight landed. Satisfied that he had made his point, Marcus returned to his seat, the weight of the confrontation still lingering in the air. Around him, the atmosphere in the cabin had shifted noticeably. Conversations were quieter, almost subdued, as if everyone sensed the gravity of what had transpired. Even the flight attendants moved with heightened caution, their usual efficiency replaced by a palpable nervousness. For Marcus, the rest of the flight passed in a blur. He declined the dessert course, opting instead to focus on drafting a plan. By the time the plane began its descent into Heathrow Airport, he had already decided on his next move. Using his phone, he typed out a detailed account of the incident, attaching screenshots of his boarding pass and photos of the meal he had been served. He wanted to document everything meticulously, ensuring that his story would resonate with authenticity and purpose. As the wheels touched down and the cabin erupted into applause, a customary gesture after a smooth landing, Marcus felt a strange sense of resolve. This experience had been painful, yes, but it had also ignited something within him, a determination to fight against injustice, no matter how subtle or insidious it might be. Stepping off the plane, he knew that this was only the beginning. The world needed to hear his story, not just to hold the airline accountable, but to spark a broader conversation about equality, respect, and the work that still needed to be done. Little did Marcus know, his decision to share his experience would set off a chain reaction that would ripple far beyond the confines of Flight 721. As Marcus stepped off the plane at Heathrow Airport, he felt a mix of emotions swirling inside him. Exhaustion from the long flight and the confrontation weighed heavily on his shoulders. But beneath it all was a simmering determination. He knew what he had experienced wasn't just an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern, one that needed to be exposed and addressed. The airline might have promised apologies and reviews, but Marcus understood that systemic change rarely came from closed-door meetings or empty gestures. If this story remained hidden, nothing would improve. It was time to bring it into the light. Once he cleared customs and retrieved his luggage, Marcus found a quiet corner in the bustling terminal. Pulling out his phone, he opened the Notes app where he'd drafted his account of the evening's events. Reading through it again, he added small details. The dismissive tone of the flight attendant, the nervous whispers among the crew, the stark contrast between his meal and those served to others. Every word mattered. Every detail painted a clearer picture of what had happened. When he was satisfied with the narrative, Marcus logged into his social media accounts. For years, Marcus had maintained a relatively low profile online, preferring to let his work speak for itself. But tonight he decided to break his silence. With a deep breath, he posted the full story, attaching photos of his boarding pass and the underwhelming meal he'd been served. In the caption, he wrote, "Tonight I flew first class but was treated like I didn't belong there. This isn't just about food, it's about respect, dignity, and equality. Let's talk about why moments like these still happen in 2023. Within minutes, the post began gaining traction. At first, it was friends and colleagues who commented, expressing outrage and support. "Unbelievable," one wrote. "This is unacceptable." Another added, "You handled it with such grace, Marcus. Thank you for speaking up." As the hours passed, however, the reach of the post expanded far beyond Marcus's immediate network. Retweets turned into thousands, likes climbed into the tens of thousands, and hashtags like "Our First Class Bias" and "Justice for Marcus" started trending worldwide. The internet moved quickly. News outlets picked up the story almost instantly, contacting Marcus for interviews. Journalists wanted to know every detail, what had been said, how the crew reacted, whether the captain followed through on his promises. Marcus agreed to a few select interviews, choosing platforms known for thoughtful reporting rather than sensationalism. During one live segment, he sat calmly in front of the camera, dressed in the same suit he'd worn during the flight. His expression was composed, but his words carried weight. "I'm not sharing this story because I want revenge or attention," Marcus explained. "I'm sharing it because we need to have honest conversations about bias and discrimination. These issues don't exist in a vacuum. They're symptoms of deeper problems within our systems and institutions. And until we address them head-on, they'll continue to affect people's lives." His message resonated deeply. Viewers flooded comment sections and social media threads with their own stories of discrimination while traveling. A young woman recounted being denied entry to a lounge despite having a valid ticket. A businessman shared how he was repeatedly questioned about his seat assignment, even though he was sitting in first class. Each story added fuel to the growing fire of public outrage. People weren't just angry, they were galvanized. Meanwhile, the airline scrambled to respond. Their initial statement issued late that night was vague and generic. "We are aware of the concerns raised by a passenger on Flight 721 and are conducting an internal investigation. We remain committed to providing exceptional service to all our customers. While the words sounded polished, they lacked substance. Critics pounced on the lack of accountability, accusing the company of dodging responsibility. Social media users dissected the statement line by line, mocking its evasiveness. Memes began circulating depicting flight attendants serving lavish meals to white passengers while handing scraps to black travelers. The backlash grew louder, more pointed. By morning, major sponsors and partners of the airline began distancing themselves. Luxury brands that advertised in-flight amenities pulled their campaigns. Corporate clients threatened to cancel contracts worth millions unless the airline took concrete action. Even frequent flyers joined the chorus of criticism, vowing to boycott the carrier until meaningful reforms were implemented. The pressure mounted rapidly, forcing the airline's executives to convene emergency meetings. Behind closed doors, tempers flared. Senior management demanded answers from the crew involved in the incident. Text messages exchanged prior to the flight surfaced during the investigation, revealing alarming attitudes among some team members. One message read, "Heard we've got a VIP passenger tonight. Hope they don't cause trouble." Another joked about certain types of people expecting special treatment. These findings confirmed what many had suspected. Marcus's treatment hadn't been accidental. It was rooted in prejudice. Faced with undeniable evidence, the airline issued a second statement, this time far more detailed. "Our investigation has uncovered unacceptable behavior by members of the cabin crew on Flight 721. Such actions do not reflect the values of our company, and we will not tolerate them." Effective immediately, the individuals involved have been terminated. Additionally, we are implementing mandatory diversity training for all staff and establishing an advisory board to ensure accountability moving forward. While the announcement drew some praise, skeptics remained cautious. Many pointed out that firing a few employees wouldn't solve the underlying issues. "It's not enough to punish the individuals involved," tweeted a prominent civil rights advocate. "The problem lies in the culture of the organization. Until that changes, incidents like these will keep happening." Despite the criticism, Marcus recognized the significance of the moment. For years, countless passengers had endured similar indignities without consequence. Now, thanks to his decision to speak up, the airline, and perhaps the entire industry, was being forced to confront uncomfortable truths. Friends and supporters urged Marcus to capitalize on the momentum, to turn this painful experience into a catalyst for change. Inspired by their encouragement, Marcus began reaching out to advocacy groups and experts in diversity and inclusion. Together, they brainstormed ways to hold corporations accountable for discriminatory practices. One idea gained particular traction, creating a platform where travelers could report incidents of bias anonymously, allowing patterns to be identified and addressed systematically. Marcus envisioned it as a tool not just for airlines but for hotels, restaurants, and other industries where discrimination often went unchecked. As the days turned into weeks, Marcus's resolve only grew stronger. What had started as a personal affront had transformed into a mission, one that extended far beyond himself. He realized that standing up against injustice wasn't just about seeking vindication, it was about paving the way for a better future. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, Marcus knew he wasn't walking it alone. Millions of voices had joined his, united in the belief that everyone deserved to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of race, background, or status. The viral storm surrounding Flight 721 had become more than just a scandal. It was a wake-up call. And as Marcus looked toward the horizon, he felt hopeful. Change was never easy, but it was possible. All it took was courage, persistence, and a willingness to shine a light on the shadows. The fallout from Marcus's social media post continued to ripple across the globe, reaching corners of the world he had never imagined. What began as a personal account of discrimination on Flight 721 had morphed into a global movement, sparking conversations about race, privilege, and accountability in ways no one could have predicted. The airline, once synonymous with luxury and prestige, now found itself at the center of a firestorm that showed no signs of dying down. For Marcus, this was both overwhelming and empowering, a testament to the power of speaking truth to power. In the days following the incident, the airline's leadership team worked tirelessly to salvage its tarnished reputation. Executives held press conferences, issuing heartfelt apologies and promising sweeping reforms. They announced plans to overhaul their training programs, introducing modules focused on unconscious bias, cultural sensitivity, and conflict resolution. To demonstrate their commitment, they invited Marcus to participate in shaping these initiatives, offering him a seat on an advisory board tasked with ensuring accountability. It was a bold move, one designed to signal transparency and progress. But Marcus knew better than to accept their offer blindly. Before agreeing to anything, Marcus sought advice from trusted mentors and experts in diversity and inclusion. He consulted civil rights organizations, industry leaders, and even former employees of the airline who had witnessed similar incidents firsthand. Their insights painted a sobering picture. While the airline's proposals sounded promising on paper, they risked being superficial if not implemented thoughtfully. "It's easy to make big promises," one advocate told him, "but real change requires consistent effort, measurable goals, and independent oversight." Armed with this knowledge, Marcus approached the airline with clear expectations. Insisted that any reforms be backed by third-party audits to ensure impartiality. He also demanded that passengers have a voice in the process, proposing the creation of a feedback system where travelers could report discriminatory behavior without fear of retaliation. Most importantly, he emphasized the need for long-term commitment. "This isn't something you can fix with a single workshop or PR campaign," Marcus explained during a meeting with senior executives. "Bias is deeply ingrained in our systems and structures. Addressing it will take time, resources, and unwavering dedication." The airline agreed to his terms, recognizing that Marcus's involvement lent credibility to their efforts. His presence on the advisory board wasn't just symbolic, it was strategic. As someone who had experienced discrimination directly, Marcus brought authenticity and urgency to the table. Under his guidance, the board developed a comprehensive plan that went beyond surface-level fixes. They introduced mandatory training sessions for all employees, from pilots to ground staff, focusing not only on identifying bias, but also on fostering empathy and understanding. They partnered with external organizations to conduct regular assessments of the airline's policies and practices, publishing detailed reports to maintain transparency. And perhaps most significantly, they established a hotline and online portal where passengers could share their experiences confidentially, knowing their voices would be heard. While these measures marked a step in the right direction, Marcus understood that accountability extended beyond the airline itself. The incident on Flight 721 had exposed flaws not just within one company, but across the entire travel industry. Inspired by the outpouring of support he'd received, Marcus decided to broaden his focus. He launched a nonprofit organization dedicated to combating discrimination in transportation and hospitality. Named Equal Sky, the initiative aimed to create safer, more inclusive spaces for travelers of all backgrounds. Equal Sky quickly gained traction, attracting donations and volunteers from around the world. Its flagship project was a digital platform where passengers could document incidents of bias, harassment, or neglect. Unlike traditional complaint systems, which often left individuals feeling unheard, Equal Sky prioritized anonymity and action. Each report was reviewed by a team of experts who analyzed patterns and trends, holding companies accountable for recurring issues. Within months, the platform had amassed thousands of entries, shedding light on systemic problems that had long gone unaddressed. Marcus also collaborated with influencers, activists, and policymakers to amplify the message of equality and justice. He appeared on talk shows, wrote op-eds, and delivered keynote speeches at conferences, urging audiences to demand better from the industries they relied on. His talks were infused with personal anecdotes, humor, and wisdom, making complex topics accessible and relatable. Audiences responded enthusiastically, hanging onto his every word and leaving inspired to effect change in their own communities. As the months passed, the impact of Marcus's efforts became undeniable. Airlines, hotels, and restaurants began revisiting their policies, implementing safeguards to prevent discrimination. Passengers reported feeling more empowered to speak up when mistreated, knowing there were mechanisms in place to support them. Even competitors of the airline involved in the original incident took note, adopting similar reforms to avoid facing public scrutiny themselves. Slowly but surely, the tide was turning. Yet, despite the progress, Marcus remained acutely aware of the challenges ahead. Discrimination wasn't a problem that could be eradicated overnight. It required constant vigilance and adaptation. There were still skeptics who dismissed his work as unnecessary or overly ambitious, arguing that isolated incidents shouldn't overshadow the strides society had made. Others accused him of seeking fame or financial gain, ignoring the fact that he poured his own resources into funding Equal Sky. Through it all, Marcus stayed grounded, reminding himself why he had embarked on this journey in the first place. One evening, as he sat in his London hotel room reflecting on everything that had transpired, Marcus opened his laptop and scrolled through the latest updates on Equal Sky. A notification caught his eye, a thank you message from a young woman who had used the platform to report an incident of racial profiling at an airport security checkpoint. Her story had been investigated, leading to disciplinary action against the officer involved. Reading her words, Marcus felt a surge of pride and purpose. This was what it was all about: empowering others to stand up for themselves and creating systems that protected the vulnerable. Though the road ahead would undoubtedly be fraught with obstacles, Marcus was undeterred. He had learned that true change didn't come from grand gestures or fleeting moments of outrage. It came from sustained effort, collaboration, and resilience. Every victory, no matter how small, brought the world closer to a future where everyone could travel, work, and live without fear of being judged based on the color of their skin. As he closed his laptop and gazed out the window at the glittering lights of the city below, Marcus allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The journey had been grueling, but it had also been transformative, not just for him but for countless others whose lives were touched by the ripple effects of his courage. And though he couldn't predict what lay ahead, one thing was certain: Marcus Thompson was ready to keep fighting. One flight, one story, and one step at a time. The months following the incident on Flight 721 had transformed Marcus Thompson in ways he never anticipated. What began as a deeply personal experience of discrimination had evolved into a global movement, one that pushed boundaries, challenged norms, and inspired countless individuals to demand better from the systems they interacted with daily. For Marcus, this journey wasn't just about holding an airline accountable. It was about redefining what equality looked like in action. And as he stood at the forefront of this change, he realized that the true measure of success wasn't in punishing those who perpetuated bias, but in empowering others to rise above it. By the end of the year, Equal Sky had become a household name. The platform Marcus had envisioned during those sleepless nights after landing in London had grown into a robust network connecting travelers, advocates, and industry leaders worldwide. Airlines, hotels, and restaurants now approached Equal Sky for guidance on improving their policies, eager to align themselves with its mission of inclusivity. The organization's annual report highlighted staggering numbers: over 500,000 reports submitted, 70% of which led to tangible changes within the companies involved. From revised training programs to updated customer service protocols, the impact was undeniable. But for Marcus, the most rewarding aspect of Equal Sky wasn't the statistics or accolades. It was the stories. Each report submitted through the platform carried a unique voice, a distinct perspective, and a shared desire for fairness. There was the elderly couple denied seating upgrades despite holding valid vouchers, the young student racially profiled by airport security, the family turned away from a hotel because of their cultural attire. These narratives reminded Marcus that behind every statistic was a human being seeking respect and dignity. By amplifying these voices, Equal Sky gave them power, the kind of power that could no longer be ignored. As the nonprofit gained momentum, Marcus found himself traveling more than ever before. But this time, his trips weren't just about business meetings or keynote speeches. They were about listening. He visited communities affected by systemic bias, sitting down with people who had faced discrimination firsthand. In South Africa, he met with activists fighting for equitable access to public transportation. In India, he spoke with hospitality workers advocating for fair treatment in luxury hotels. In Brazil, he joined forces with grassroots organizations working to eliminate racial profiling in airports. Everywhere he went, Marcus absorbed lessons that enriched his understanding of inequality and strengthened his resolve to combat it. These experiences also taught him humility. While Marcus had always been driven by a desire to help others, he now recognized that leadership wasn't about having all the answers. It was about creating space for collaboration, fostering dialogue, and learning from those whose struggles differed from his own. This realization reshaped how he approached his work. Instead of dictating solutions, Marcus encouraged open conversations, inviting diverse perspectives to shape Equal Skies initiatives. The result was a model of advocacy that was inclusive, adaptive, and deeply effective. Back home in New York, Marcus continued to balance his roles as a CEO and an activist. His tech startup thrived under his leadership, thanks in part to the renewed sense of purpose he brought to the company. Inspired by Equal Sky, he implemented new diversity initiatives within his own organization, ensuring that employees from underrepresented backgrounds felt valued and supported. The ripple effects were profound. Productivity soared, morale improved, and innovation flourished. Colleagues often remarked that Marcus seemed lighter, more energized, a testament to the fulfillment he derived from combining his professional expertise with his passion for social justice. Despite his achievements, Marcus remained grounded. He knew that progress was fragile, susceptible to setbacks if not nurtured carefully. That's why he made it a point to celebrate small victories along the way, whether it was a teenager using Equal Sky to file her first complaint, or a corporate executive admitting fault and committing to change. These moments served as reminders that even the smallest actions could spark monumental shifts. One such moment came during an awards ceremony honoring trailblazers in social impact. As Marcus accepted the prestigious Global Equity Award, the audience erupted into applause. Standing on stage, he reflected on the long and winding road that had brought him here. "This isn't my victory," he said, his voice steady, yet filled with emotion. "It belongs to everyone who has ever been told they didn't belong, to everyone who refused to accept that answer. True change doesn't come from one person or one organization. It comes from all of us, working together to build a world where opportunities are limitless and respect is universal." His speech resonated deeply, earning a standing ovation that echoed long after the event ended. Later that evening, as Marcus scrolled through messages of gratitude and admiration on his phone, he paused on one in particular. It was from a young boy named Elijah, who wrote simply, "Thank you for showing me I can be anything I want to be." Reading those words, Marcus felt tears welling up in his eyes. This was why he did what he did, not for recognition or fame, but for moments like this, when hope took root in someone else's heart. In the years that followed, Marcus continued to expand Equal Sky's reach, tackling new challenges and exploring innovative solutions. The organization launched partnerships with schools to educate students about bias and inclusion, created mentorship programs for aspiring leaders from marginalized communities, and even developed a mobile app that allowed users to rate businesses based on their commitment to equality. Through it all, Marcus stayed true to his core belief that everyone deserved to live in a world free from prejudice and fear. And while the scars of that fateful flight lingered, Marcus viewed them not as wounds but as reminders of how far he and society had come. Discrimination still existed, of course. It would take generations to dismantle centuries of inequity. But Marcus saw glimmers of hope everywhere he looked, in the growing number of allies joining the fight, in the resilience of those who refused to be silenced, and in the collective determination to leave the world better than we found it. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Marcus sat on the balcony of his Manhattan apartment, sipping coffee and watching the city buzz below. His mind drifted back to that night on Flight 721, the frustration, the confrontation, the decision to speak out. If someone had told him then that his actions would inspire millions, he might have laughed. Yet here he was, proof that one voice could indeed ignite a revolution. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the skyline, Marcus smiled to himself. Life had taken him places he never imagined, challenging him in ways he couldn't have foreseen. But through it all, he had discovered something invaluable: the strength to stand up, the courage to speak out, and the power to turn pain into purpose. And as long as there were battles left to fight, Marcus knew he wouldn't stop, not until the skies were truly equal for everyone.